Hello, and welcome back to another Daily Top 10's Top 10 video. Ever since we came down out of the trees, humans have loved a good fight. Whether it's with sticks, spears, swords, guns, or Twitter, there's always been a fight going on somewhere. And although victory normally goes to the biggest, richest armies, this is not always the case. And battles and wars have been lost thanks to some very stupid choices that were made. Today, we're looking at the top 10 worst ever military decisions. Number 10. Showboating. Most of us have done a bit of showboating, but none will have gone as catastrophically as this maneuver by the British Navy in 1893. The HMS Victoria was one of the most powerful battleships, and the Vice Admiral, Sir George Tyrone, who commanded the fleet in the Mediterranean, was leading a demonstration in Tripoli, Lebanon. But there was a terrible miscommunication, and the Victoria was rammed by another ship. Within 13 minutes, it had capsized and begun to sink. 358 died, just over half the crew, including Tyrone, who had even waved away rescue ships after the collision, as he thought they'd be fine. Number 9. Pickett's Charge. The American Civil War reached a head at the Battle of Gettysburg, one of the most important fights in American history. Confederate General Robert E. Lee had failed in 2 flanking attacks on the Union in the previous day, so he decided he'd have a go right down the middle. He sent about 12,500 infantrymen across the open field, after trying to soften the enemy up with artillery. The problem was Union Major General George G. Meade had been all, "That's totes what I thought you'd do, jackass." So his army was more than prepared, and they easily held the line, killing half the attacking troops. It's known as Pickett's Charge since George Pickett led the assault. Number 8. Pausing Operation Barbarossa. Russia, as you may have noticed, is pretty large. So if you want to invade it, make sure you bring some spare socks because you're going to be walking a while. Operation Barbarossa was the Nazi codename for their attempt to take over the Soviet homeland in June 1941. It ended up being the largest military operation in human history, and it was going pretty well for the Germans when they approached Moscow within 6 months. But thanks to terrible weather conditions, they decided to pause as their tanks were struggling with the mud. This break allowed a massive regrouping for the Red Army and for forces from Serbia to arrive. Had they pushed on, the Germans likely would have taken Moscow. Number 7. Napoleon invades Russia. And the Germans should have known that invading Russia was an almost impossible task, since they had the example of the previous century's greatest military to look back on. Napoleon took a huge force of 680,000 into Western Russia in 1812, hoping to have a quick fight, defeat the army, and win a lifetime supply of Fabergé eggs. But the Russians kept falling back and left Cossack fighters to burn the ground so the French would run out of food. It worked. The French were shocked by the tactic, as they believed only quails and crepes were supposed to be flambéed. The French took Moscow, but again, it had already been evacuated, so it really took the fun out of it, and they eventually went home. Number 6. Ladies verboten. If there's one thing you can't accuse the Nazis of, it's being too politically correct. Not only did they believe in a racial order, but also a male and female one. Women were kept out of politics and the military and even labor as much as possible. This lack of faith in his women was a huge oversight by Hitler, since British and Soviet women basically ran the production lines of weapons for their armies, keeping the armies supplied and food on the tables. Number 5. Russians in Afghanistan. When the US invaded Afghanistan in 2001, the Russians had a quiet chuckle to themselves, knowing that there'd be no quick victory. How did they know? Well, they'd spent 10 years fighting in Afghanistan trying to keep the communist government in place. The war dragged on and became a factor in the collapse of the Soviet Union. But this wasn't the worst error. Since the Cold War was going on, the US and British armed and trained the opposing side, the Mujahideen, including a young fighter named Osama bin Laden. As you can guess, that worked out really well for everyone. Number 4. Slave Army. The Shang dynasty ruled China for some 600 years, finally losing their grip about 1000 BC. There had been an ongoing struggle with the Zhao, which culminated in the Zhao marching on the ancient capital of Yin. The Zhao only had 5,000 men, while the Shang had over 500,000. But to be on the safe side, the Shang leader thought it would be a wonderful idea to arm 170,000 slaves to help with the defense. The slaves, unsurprisingly, just wandered over to the other side. Many of the Shang troops were so disheartened by this and years of corruption that they just laid down their weapons. Number 3. Launch failure. The Musashi was ordered just before World War II began and was one of the biggest, most powerful warships ever built when it was launched in November 1940. But pushing a gigantic metal monster out into the bay caused a massive surge in the water levels, and it created a tsunami which raced up the rivers, flooding many homes and destroyed local fishing boats. It's not exactly the protection the people of Japan were hoping for. Number 2. Letting a novice run the show at the Battle of Arezzo. A Roman battle against the Gaul did not go as planned in 105 BC. They had 2 armies present, but they refused to cooperate with each other and ended up losing virtually all their troops, incurring the biggest loss in the history of ancient Rome. The biggest error, though, was allowing a complete novice to take command. Rome had plenty of seasoned military leaders, but Gnaeus Mallius Maximus was basically the office intern, and he made a less than excellent job of it. Number 1. Not realizing there would be an airstrike in the Battle of Longwala. The Indo-Pakistan War in 1971 lasted just 3 days, but this was still long enough for the Pakistani military to make a series of massive blunders. The Battle of Longwala involved just 120 Indian soldiers against 2,000 men and 45 tanks. But their failure to do any real reconnaissance meant they overlooked the fact that the Indians had 4 planes, and they were destroyed by the airstrikes that followed. Bigger isn't always better. Thanks for watching another Daily Top 10's Top 10 video. And remember, it's our duty to entertain and yours to subscribe.
Please subscribe to Delhi top stands.